time in Eastern Europe when it all fell apart and George Bush held the world together. He is. You wrote about your dad during that period of time, 88 through 92. All of his life, George Bush had been a humble man. He wasn't trying to score points for himself. He only cared about results, and he knew the best way to achieve results was to think about the situation from the other person's perspective. Freedom had a better chance to succeed in Central and Eastern Europe if he did not provoke the Soviets to intervene in the budding revolution. And you quote him as saying, "I'm not going to go dance on the wall." Probably one of the most important decisions not to act the president has ever made.
I think so in many ways. Ronald Reagan gets a lot of credit for beginning the ideological victory of freedom over communism. Dad should get a lot of credit for unwinding of the Cold War in a peaceful way. The story, of course, is that it was clear that the Soviet was collapsing, Dad felt it's very important to not provoke people within Russia and the old Soviet, which would the hardliners, provoke the hardliners, so that they would, use force. They still had the military at their disposal, and it could have been unbelievably bloody. And so he tried to think about Gorbachev's position and work closely with Gorbachev to encourage him to eventually take the path he took, which was a peaceful unwinding of the Soviet.
Now, one of the critiques of the Bush years and of the Clinton years is that after the Cold War was won, President 41 and President 42 turned their attention away from Afghanistan too quickly, and that they had sided too much with Zia and the Pakistanis, and they didn't pay attention to what grew, the cancer within. What do you make of that criticism, Mr. President?
Oh, I don't know. It's easy to second-guess presidential decisions. I frankly, in my research, didn't spend much time on that topic, so I'm really not capable of answering it in depth. Every president, people look back and criticize decisions, certainly in my case, and ultimately history judges that will be, will sort things out in a fair way, and I think people will analyze that in more in depth. I just don't, I don't have a response on it. Obviously, I had to deal with Pakistan during my presidency, and people often ask me, did I think that Pakistan was aiding and abetting Osama bin Laden? I don't think so. I mean, one reason Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was captured because of close cooperation between our intelligence services and the Pak intelligence services.
I'm watching I'm listening to President Bush talk, and I'm watching Governor Jay Nixon of Missouri talking about, peace, respect, restraint. There's a whole bunch of people lined up in Ferguson, Missouri, who are taking turns at the microphone. We don't know what the grand jury has decided. We will not know what the grand jury is going to decide until 9 p.m. in the East, 8 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Remind you of your father's presidency. Wasn't really his fault. He selected Justice Souter over Judge Edith Jones. And I'm always wondering, do you think it was wrong for Justice Souter not to put his cards on the table? I mean, he's just a hardline liberal, and your father wasn't looking for that, but your father was very trusting there. Ought a justice to be, or, when you interviewed Roberts or Alito, did they put their cards on the table, and should they put their cards on the table?
Well, I think the thing about it is that, I put that in there because, he made a great pick in Clarence Thomas, but Souter turned out to be something that he thought. I don't know how the process worked. I do know that, he had strong recommendations from people from New Hampshire. I really don't know whether or not he sat down and interviewed him. One of the reasons I put that in there, though, is that I wanted people, and throughout the book I put lessons learned. I spent quite a bit of time with Judge Roberts and Judge Alito, as well as other candidates. I didn't ask them was whether or not they would change their philosophy over time.
And when we come back from break, we'll talk some more about whether or not he's happy with the judges he appointed, and that Justice Souter question. On Ferguson as well. I'll keep you posted on all the breaking news.
I put that in there because, he made a great pick in Clarence Thomas, but Souter turned out to be something that he thought. I don't know how the process worked. I do know that, he had strong recommendations from people from New Hampshire. I really don't know whether or not he sat down and interviewed him. One of the reasons I put that in there, though, is that I wanted people, and throughout the book, I put lessons learned. I spent quite a bit of time with Judge Roberts and Judge Alito, as well as other candidates. I didn't ask them, why they wrote such and such an opinion, because I wasn't a lawyer. But what I was looking for was whether or not they would change their philosophy over time. In other words, everybody says they were, they're a strict they believe in the strict interpretation of the Constitution. They all said that. The question is, one, were they capable of writing those kinds of opinions that would reflect that, and two, would they do so throughout their life?
Were you disappointed?
What was that now?
Were you disappointed by Chief Justice Roberts' opinion on Obamacare? I said I wasn't, but a lot of people have been.
Yeah, they are. They're going to throughout his time on the court, people have different opinions of the opinions he writes. One thing for certain, though, is John Roberts is a fine Chief Justice, and I'm very proud of how he's conducting himself on the court, as I am Sam Alito.
Now, there are some interesting details about campaigning, lessons learned, and the debate with Geraldine Ferraro. First of all, I didn't know he spent the night before looking for your daughter's stuffed animal, Spiky, with a flashlight. That's not good debate prep. But
no, actually, it may be the best debate prep in the end, when I think about it. I mean, the real problem in debates is that you got all these advisors sitting there, say this, say that, don't say this, don't say that, and your head gets all clogged up. And looking for the stuffed animal for the distraught grandchild might have been a good diversion.
Okay, well, particularly the women were actively rooting for Geraldine Ferraro on page 155. Do you think that's going to be true about former Secretary of State Clinton in the upcoming race, that the women in the press corps will be actively rooting for her?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm sure, who knows? I mean, one thing is for certain, the press corps, some of the press corps, whether they agree with the statement or not, tend to show their, who they're for. And I remember traveling with Dad there some in '84, and there was a palpable kind of anger and angst toward him and his candidacy. And so I editorialized in the book that's what I came away thinking. By the way, I think it's very touching how Dad ended up treating Geraldine Ferraro. They became good friends. Prior to his death, he wrote her a very sweet letter. Prior to her death, wrote her a very sweet letter.
He's also become, this is very interesting, and your father and former President Clinton and you and former President Clinton get along well, and they call him the black sheep of the Bush family. Is that going to mean hands behind your back if Hillary's up against Jeb in 2 years?
Well, if that happens, and I don't know if it is, I, of course, will be all in for Jeb, and I'll still maintain my friendship with Bill.
Okay.
As will Dad.
Now, one of the key lessons here in this book is that you wrote that you took a lot of lessons from your dad regarding personal diplomacy with international leaders. Now, you won't recall this, but you used to have a bunch of talk show hosts back to the White House, and on August 1 of 2007, you had a half dozen of us come in, and we were late coming in, because you were on a telecom with the Prime Minister of Iraq, Maliki, that went long. And you remarked when we sat down how much time you spent trying to teach him democratic leadership one-on-one. Are you disappointed with how Maliki turned out?
Well, he had a lot of pressure. I mean, again, when I left office, I was pretty convinced that Maliki was growing into a leader that could help Iraq transition from Saddam to democracy. As a matter of fact, the country is looking like it's heading that way from during 2009 and 2010. I don't know. I don't know all the facts there as to why he made some of the decisions he made. I do think, though, that when history looks back at a transition from a very difficult period of time to what looked like a stable democracy at the time, Maliki will get some credit for it.
Interesting. On page 186, Rapoport reflected his quiet faith. You're right, he was a religious man, but he was not comfortable espousing his faith in the public square. Did he ever talk with you about the Bible studies you attended, Mr. President, or how you were fairly free with your faith in conversation with people?
Yeah, one thing I put in, I thought was a pretty good line that I learned from him was, preach the gospel daily, and if necessary, use words.
Yes.
I thought that summarized his view of religion. Yeah, there was a story in there about I was asked during a debate in the primary, my most favorite philosopher, unscripted, of course, I blurted out Christ, and they said, why? And I said, because he changed my heart. Of course, I was thinking about Billy Graham helping me understand, get back into the faith, and quitting drinking about the same time. And he called me on the phone. He always called me after these big debates or big moments and said, great job, son, and everything. But in this call, he called and said, I don't think that answer is going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because what he was basically saying is that people get suspicious of politicians saying, I'm more religious than you are. As a matter of fact, you get kind of suspicious of anybody saying that. And